The galaxy was old, filled with thousands of advanced civilizations that believed they had reached the peak of knowledge. They had mapped every star, studied every atom, and bent the laws of physics to their will. Across the great spiral arms, the galactic concord ruled as the symbol of peace and progress. Planets were connected by shimmering gates of light, messages traveled faster than thought, and wars had become only a memory told in history lessons. In this golden age, the beings of the galaxy looked down on those who still believed in things they could not prove. They thought that logic and science were the only truths that mattered. To them, emotions were chemical reactions, faith was ignorance, and stories about gods or heroes were nothing but foolish entertainment. The Concord scholars often said, "The universe does not need hope, it only needs understanding," and the people agreed. For centuries, young minds were taught to laugh at the idea of anything beyond measurement. Planets competed not in art or philosophy, but in the number of equations their scientists could solve. Machines replaced imagination, and the word myth became a polite insult. Entire museums were dedicated to the age of superstition, showing how primitive species once believed in fate, destiny, or miracles. The galaxy had outgrown dreams, or so it thought. Among the many races, there were some who wondered if something was missing. They felt a quiet emptiness inside their perfect cities, where stars always shone the same and days passed without surprise. But whenever they tried to speak about meaning or belief, the Concord silenced them. "We are the universe's proof of reason," said the leaders. "We need no myths to guide us." And so, the galaxy moved forward, proud but hollow. One day, explorers discovered faint signals from a distant, unimportant blue planet. The signals were old, older than any civilization remembered. They came from a world called Earth, a tiny dot orbiting an average star. The archives were filled with strange sounds, music, stories, and voices talking about gods, monsters, love, and courage. The Concord scientists gathered the data and laughed, calling it the greatest comedy of the primitive age. They listened to tales of heroes who fought dragons, mortals who challenged fate, and gods who wept for humankind. They watched images of humans dreaming of the stars, promising to reach them one day. To the galaxy, these stories were proof of humanity's foolishness. "See how they fear the unknown," said one scholar. "They create invisible powers to explain what they cannot understand." Another laughed. "They believed in miracles instead of physics." The recordings became popular entertainment, a joke shared across the stars. Over time, humans became a symbol of what not to be. When a young student questioned a scientific law, teachers would say, "Do not think like a human," meaning do not dream too wildly, do not believe in things that cannot be proven. Yet secretly, some were drawn to those old human voices. The songs and words carried something they could not explain: warmth, hope, and courage. It felt alive, unlike the cold perfection of the Concord. But those feelings were quietly ignored. Logic was safer, predictable, and measurable. Faith was chaos, and chaos had no place in the perfect galaxy. The Concord grew prouder each century, declaring that nothing in the universe could surprise them anymore. They believed they understood everything that existed, every particle, every law, every mystery. They laughed at the idea that anything could lie beyond their reach. And so, the galaxy continued in its endless calm, glowing cities orbiting silent suns, each race certain that they were the masters of existence. They told themselves that myths were for children and weak minds, and that the universe was a machine, cold, perfect, and knowable. They could not see how far they had drifted from wonder, from the spark that once made life reach for the stars. The galaxy had achieved enlightenment, yes, but at a cost. It had forgotten how to dream, how to hope, how to believe in something greater than itself. It laughed at the past and feared nothing, except the idea that it might be wrong. And somewhere, far beyond the edge of mapped space, in the deep silence between galaxies, something ancient and human was watching, waiting for the right moment to return. When the explorers first found the strange signals from the small blue planet, they didn't think much of it. The data floated through the void for centuries, tiny waves of sound and light that somehow survived the emptiness. A science vessel named Orion was the first to pick it up while scanning the edges of the Orion Spur. The crew expected to find nothing but static, yet what they discovered made them burst out laughing. The signals were filled with strange voices, music, and moving images from an ancient world. The beings on that world called themselves humans, and they seemed obsessed with telling stories. There were stories of gods who ruled the skies, heroes who fought monsters, and dreamers who reached for the stars. To the crew of the Orion, it was ridiculous. They could not believe that a species would waste so much energy creating fantasy instead of studying truth. They sent the files to the Galactic Concord, eager to share this strange discovery. When the data reached the great capital world of Lurith Prime, Scholars and historians rushed to examine it. Soon, lecture halls were filled with laughter. The galaxy's most respected scientists watched old Earth films and heard ancient human songs. They studied the myths of Zeus, Thor, and Ara, the tales of love and loss, and the endless belief in miracles. To them, it was like reading the diary of a child who still believed in fairy tales. One famous historian, Draltok of the Virene species, wrote, "Humans are the perfect example of emotional chaos. They built their civilization on fear and faith, not on facts." His paper was praised across the galaxy. Others joined him, calling humanity the dreaming species, a race that could not separate fantasy from reality. The Galactic Concord turned these findings into entertainment. Their museums built special halls dedicated to the human archives, where visitors could watch scenes from Earth's old movies or listen to its songs. Children giggled at the idea of heroes who fought for love. Adults joked that humans prayed to invisible powers. Even philosophers used the material to prove their theories that belief was a sickness caused by emotional instability. The myths of Earth became a running joke. The humans created gods to feel less small. They said, "How pitiful." Yet despite all the mockery, the archives became the most visited exhibit in the entire Concord. It fascinated them to see a world that had been so alive. In one section of the museum, visitors could walk through holograms of Earth's great legends. They could see a hero raising a sword against darkness, a mother protecting her child from a storm, a scientist looking up at the stars. It was all fiction, of course, but it stirred something deep in the hearts of those who watched. They didn't talk about it, but many visitors felt something strange, a spark of emotion that logic could not explain. Some said it was curiosity, others called it nostalgia, even though they had never lived on Earth. Over time, some species began collecting human relics. The galaxy's archaeologists searched the dead planet for remains of human culture. They found shattered monuments, rusted machines, and half-buried books. They brought them back to study, but not with respect. They wanted to prove that myths always lead to destruction. "See," said the Concord leaders, "the humans believed too much, and their world burned because of it." They pointed to the ruins as proof that emotion was dangerous. But there were whispers, quiet ones, passed between young researchers who studied the human signals late at night. They noticed something strange in the data. Hidden inside human stories were patterns of thought, rhythms of emotion that seemed to follow universal logic. The way humans built their myths showed creativity that no machine could copy. It was as if they had found beauty inside chaos, meaning inside madness. A young historian named Kalin noticed that many human myths spoke of return, heroes coming back from death, civilizations rising after ruin. He wondered if these stories were more than imagination. "Maybe they knew something we don't," he said once, but his supervisor silenced him. "Don't be foolish," she warned. "Myths are the toys of extinct minds." Still, Kalin could not forget the feeling he had while listening to a human song called "We'll Meet Again." It sounded less like fiction and more like a promise. The Concord continued to mock humanity for centuries, turning their culture into shows, plays, and academic debates. They joked about how humans dreamed of gods, even while their planet fell to dust. Yet in quiet corners of the galaxy, more and more people began to feel uneasy. The laughter started to fade, replaced by curiosity. What if humans had seen something the rest of the galaxy couldn't? What if their myths weren't lies, but warnings? Still, the Concord ignored the doubts. They were too proud, too certain of their perfection. To them, humanity was gone forever, their myths only echoes of a primitive age. The archives remained open, the laughter continued, and the galaxy moved on, never realizing that the humans who once told those stories might not be gone at all. They might just be waiting for the right moment, somewhere beyond the stars, watching, listening, and remembering every word the galaxy had said about them. The search teams who first arrived at Earth expected to find a world full of strange creatures or perhaps the last traces of human life. Instead, they found silence. The planet that had once been bright with cities and oceans was now gray and broken. The sky was filled with dust, and the surface looked as if it had been burned again and again. Great scars ran across the continents where entire cities had once stood. The oceans had pulled back, leaving behind dry plains of salt and stone. The explorers walked through the ruins in quiet disbelief. They had seen many dead worlds before, but this one felt different. There was a strange sadness in the air, as if the planet still remembered the people who had once loved it. They found buildings half buried in sand, metal towers melted by heat, and machines that had not moved for thousands of years. The air was thin, the wind dry, and nothing living moved across the empty land. When they reached what had once been the human capital, they uncovered statues, books, and data chips. but the chips were damaged, and the books were mostly ash. The statues, however, showed faces, human faces, looking upward, not in fear, but in hope. It was unsettling. The scientists could not understand why a species facing destruction would carve faces that smiled at the sky. One of the explorers said softly, "Maybe they were waiting for something," but the others laughed, calling it a poetic thought unfit for science. Reports were sent back to the Galactic Concord, and soon every world knew the news. Humanity was gone, wiped out by war, by nature, or by their own foolishness. No one knew for sure. The official record called it self-induced extinction, a final warning about the danger of emotions and belief. The Concord leaders held public speeches, saying, "This is what happens when a species worships dreams instead of logic." The audience applauded, proud that their own worlds had moved beyond such weakness. Scholars began writing books about humanity's end. They said humans were victims of their own imagination, that they believed too strongly in their myths and created weapons that destroyed them. Some said the humans tried to become gods and failed, others argued they simply couldn't handle their own power. Whatever the theory, one message was clear: humanity was finished, and the galaxy had nothing to learn from them. Their story was over. But even as the galaxy mocked them, strange things kept appearing in the ruins. Deep under the burned cities, machines still hummed quietly, untouched by time. They were different from anything the explorers had seen. Their design was elegant yet beyond all known engineering. When activated, the machines projected symbols, words in old human languages mixed with strange equations that no scientist could understand. Some said it was art, others said it was madness. The data was sent to the Concord Central Archive and locked away, too confusing to bother with. Despite this, rumors began to spread. A few explorers claimed they saw moving lights under the oceans, shapes that looked like massive shadows gliding beneath the waves. When they returned to investigate, the sea was calm again, and nothing appeared on the sensors. Another team reported hearing a faint radio signal that repeated a single phrase in human speech, but before they could record it, the signal vanished. The phrase was later translated to mean, "We are not gone." Of course, the Concord dismissed these stories as nonsense. The officials said that imagination was contagious, especially when explorers spent too long on dead worlds. Still, something about Earth disturbed everyone who visited it. The planet didn't feel empty, it felt asleep, as if it were holding its breath, waiting. The galaxy ignored the feeling and soon moved on, leaving Earth alone once again. Over the next decades, Earth's name became a lesson. Children learned that Earth syndrome meant emotional instability caused by too much imagination. Teachers warned their students, be careful not to dream like the humans did. The Concord even used Earth's ruins as a tourist site. Visitors could walk through the remains of human cities while guides joked about the tragic dreamers. They pointed out the ancient books of myth and said, this is where belief led them. Yet there were still those who couldn't forget the feeling of standing on that quiet world. They couldn't forget the smiling statues, the strange machines, the flickers of energy deep under the soil. Some whispered that maybe the humans hadn't died, maybe they had found a way to leave, to step beyond the physical universe. No one dared to say it publicly. It would have sounded like another human myth. Years passed, and the story of Earth became a memory. The galaxy went back to its science and pride, and no one cared about the dead blue planet anymore. But far out in the darkness, where no ship had gone before, faint signals began to move again. The same kind of signals the Orion had once found, only stronger. They carried the same old human frequencies, the same impossible emotion, the sound of hope. The galaxy ignored them, laughing as always, never realizing that the myth they had mocked was about to awaken, and the silence of Earth was only the calm before the return. At first, the strange readings were ignored. The galaxy was full of random signals, dying stars, and magnetic storms that confused scanners. But this time, the readings were different. They came from places where nothing should exist, regions of cold, empty space far beyond the edges of known systems. The first report came from an observation station near the Perseus Reach. The crew had detected a wave of gravity that lasted for only a few seconds. It was too strong to be natural, but it didn't match any known weapon or stellar event. The report was filed and forgotten, like many others. Weeks later, another station vanished. No distress signal, no explosion, just silence. Patrol ships were sent to investigate, but when they arrived, there was nothing, only a faint trail of radiation leading deeper into the void. Scientists said it was an accident, maybe a malfunction. The galaxy had no enemies, so they saw no reason to worry, but whispers began to spread among the outposts. Whispers of something moving in the dark, something that left no trace except fear. The Concord Council dismissed the rumors. There are no monsters in space, they said, only physics. They reminded the public that myths were for extinct worlds like Earth, not for enlightened species, yet the disappearances continued, and the readings grew stranger: curved space, broken light patterns, sounds like distant voices echoing through quantum channels. Nothing made sense anymore, but the officials kept smiling, pretending everything was under control. Out in the frontier, captains began to speak privately about what they'd seen. One freighter claimed to have passed near a black region where light itself seemed to die. The crew reported seeing shapes moving within it, vast silhouettes gliding like shadows against the stars. Their navigation system froze, and a voice, faint but human, whispered through the static, "Remember us." When they returned, half the crew refused to work again, calling it a hallucination. Scientists proposed theories. They said the galaxy was shifting through a gravitational phase, or that an ancient star had collapsed into an unstable wormhole, but deep down, even they felt uneasy. The patterns of energy reminded them of something they had once studied, the old human transmissions. The pulse frequencies were almost identical to the ones found in Earth's lost signals. It was a coincidence, of course. At least that's what they told themselves. More fleets were lost. The largest incident happened near the dark sector known as N9, where an entire research convoy disappeared. A single transmission reached the Concorde before contact broke. It contained one sentence, spoken in a language long forgotten, Old Earth English: "We are awake." The words sent chills through every translator who heard them, but the Concorde declared it fake, probably a corrupted signal from old archives. They banned the media from discussing it, fearing public panic. Still, unease grew across the systems. Trade routes began to close, and the outer colonies started preparing defenses they hadn't used in generations. Patrols doubled their watch, but their ships returned with recordings filled with static and strange symbols. Some said they looked like writing, curved lines, stars, and circles forming patterns that almost resembled constellations. The historians noticed they matched the shapes found on the old human monuments discovered on Earth, but no one wanted to admit it. In the academies, some young scholars dared to ask the forbidden question: what if it's them? They were laughed at, scolded, and reminded that humanity was gone. "You can't fight ghosts," said one senior scientist, but the question refused to die. It passed from mind to mind, whisper to whisper, growing like a seed of doubt in the heart of reason. Every week, new anomalies appeared. Ships vanished without a sound, sensors showed impossible readings, and sometimes, just for a second, the void itself seemed to shimmer, like a curtain being lifted, and behind that curtain, something enormous moved. The galaxy's perfect order began to crack, and fear, that ancient emotion once mocked by the enlightened races, returned. People began to dream again, dreams of oceans and blue skies, of voices calling from beyond the stars. Some said they heard the name Earth in their sleep. The leaders of the Concorde tried to restore control, insisting there was no mystery, but the universe no longer listened. The silence that followed the last disappearance was so deep it felt alive, watching, waiting. And then, without warning, the signals stopped. Every sensor across the galaxy went dark for 3 full minutes. When they came back online, the stars had shifted slightly, as if space itself had moved. The scientists had no explanation. They called it the Great Distortion, but the people had another name for it: the Awakening. In the deep of the void, where the missing fleets had vanished, something had opened, something old, something powerful, something that carried the echo of humanity's voice. The myths the galaxy once mocked were no longer stories, they were warnings, and the galaxy was beginning to remember too late what it had forgotten to fear. When the darkness finally tore open, the galaxy saw something it had never seen before. The stars around the breach bent like liquid, and light twisted into spirals that painted the void in gold and blue. From that glowing wound in space, a formation of ships began to emerge. They came slowly at first, as if testing reality itself, then all at once, hundreds, maybe thousands of them, vast as cities, silent as shadows. Their hulls were black, covered in symbols that glowed faintly, patterns that no language in the Concorde could translate. The ships didn't send any identification codes, no signals, no greetings, only the quiet hum of energy that made sensors scream. The first fleet to encounter them was the Concorde's Border Defense Unit, led by Commander Jethar of the Thrall. His fleet had the newest technology, weapons capable of splitting moons. He hailed the strangers, demanding their identity, but there was no reply, only static. Then, out of the silence, a single message came across every channel, every frequency, every mind that could hear. It was spoken in a language the galaxy hadn't heard in centuries. Humanity endures. The voice was calm, steady, and filled with power. At first, the Concorde thought it was a trick, maybe a ghost signal from some lost transmission, but then the ships moved. They formed precise formations, their engines leaving trails of faint blue light that looked like wings in the dark. The border fleet opened fire, confident that their weapons could destroy anything. Energy cannons lit the void, missiles flew, but when the explosions cleared, the human ships were untouched. The weapons had simply bent around them, their energy absorbed by invisible fields. Then the human fleet responded, not with light, but with silence. One moment the Concorde ships were there, the next, they were gone, erased without heat or debris. Only small waves of gravity rippled through the void, as if the ships had been folded out of existence. Those who witnessed it later said it felt like the universe itself had taken a breath. The news spread through the galaxy like fire. The Concorde Council called an emergency meeting. Scientists tried to explain what had happened, saying it was impossible. No species, not even the oldest, could command that level of control over physics. The ships had appeared from nowhere, from the spaces between mapped coordinates, from the void itself. Some believed it was a new species imitating humanity, but the recordings of the transmission proved otherwise. The voice, human in tone and rhythm, had matched perfectly with archived recordings from Earth's old broadcasts. Every attempt to communicate was ignored. The human fleet moved with purpose, passing through systems that had once mocked their myths. They didn't attack planets or colonies, but their presence alone caused panic. Whole worlds went dark, shutting down their communication systems out of fear. No one could understand their technology. Their ships didn't use engines in any known form. Instead, they seemed to bend the very space around them, traveling through dimensions the Concorde had only theorized. Some said the humans had become ghosts, others said they had evolved into beings of energy, but one thing was certain: they had returned, not as a forgotten species, but as something far beyond the galaxy's understanding. Their ships carried symbols that looked like constellations, some matching ancient human myths: Orion, Pegasus, Phoenix. It was as if their history, their faith, and their science had merged into one. A group of brave researchers sent a probe close to one of the human ships. The probe transmitted only a few seconds of data before vanishing, but in that short moment, the sensors recorded something extraordinary. Inside the ship's energy field, there were heartbeats, millions of them, synchronized like music. It wasn't a machine, it was alive. The Concorde tried once more to resist, gathering all its fleets near the core. The greatest armada in galactic history prepared for battle. They called it Operation Eclipse, believing they could overwhelm the newcomers with numbers. When the two forces met, the sky itself turned into a storm of light. Yet, no sound came from the human ships, only the steady pulse of energy, calm, certain, unstoppable. The Concorde's fleets fought bravely, but every attack failed. Human ships moved as if they could predict every move, their weapons firing in patterns that seemed random but perfect. One by one, the Concorde ships fell, not destroyed but disarmed, as if humanity refused to kill unnecessarily. When the battle ended, the human fleet stood untouched, hovering silently among the remains of the once proud Concorde navy. Then a final message echoed across every system, this time not in English, but in every language known in the galaxy. "We have returned to remind you," it said, "that myths are not weakness, they are memory, they are the map to what you forgot to believe in." And then, as suddenly as they had come, the human fleet vanished, fading back into the dark, leaving behind nothing but awe and fear. The galaxy was silent for days after that. The scientists could not explain it, the soldiers could not fight it, and the historians could not deny it. Humanity, the species they had mocked for dreaming too much, had returned from the void with power beyond reason. The myths had come alive, and the galaxy finally understood. The stories they once laughed at were never just stories, they were the blueprint of something greater, something eternal, and that something had a name: human. Panic spread through the Concorde as fast as light. The leaders of the galaxy gathered in endless meetings, their faces pale and voices shaking. They refused to believe that the fleet was truly human. It had to be a trick, a phantom army created by some lost civilization. Yet the recordings did not lie. The ships, the symbols, the voice, all of it matched the ancient records of Earth. The very species they had mocked for centuries had somehow returned, stronger than any empire that existed. The galaxy trembled, not just from fear of destruction, but from the fear of being wrong. The Concorde prepared its full military strength, calling fleets from every corner of known space. Hundreds of thousands of ships gathered, each one equipped with the most advanced weapons ever built. Their scientists assured them that the laws of physics could not be broken, that these human ships were only using illusions or hidden tricks. They believed logic would win, because it always had. They believed the humans were just another mystery to be solved, not a force to be feared. But when the battle began, everything they believed shattered. The human fleet did not charge or fire first. It waited, silent and still, letting the Concorde make the first move. When the Concorde ships attacked, beams of pure energy filled the stars, explosions brighter than suns tore through space, yet none of it mattered. The human ships moved in ways that defied reason. They folded through space like liquid light, appearing and disappearing in seconds. Their shields shimmered with impossible beauty, patterns that looked like constellations, like living starlight. The Concorde ships fell apart without being touched. Entire fleets lost control of their systems, their weapons turning off as if the ships had chosen peace. In moments, the proudest armada in galactic history became powerless. The human fleet moved forward, not to destroy, but to show what it could do. The galaxy's greatest weapons meant nothing, and for the first time, the enlightened races of the Concorde felt what humans once called humility. The scientists watching the battle could not understand the data. Every scan showed that the human ships were using energy that existed outside known dimensions. They were bending time and gravity, shaping matter like clay. The impossible had become real. The humans had done what the galaxy thought was myth. They had turned belief into technology. They were using the very ideas that the Concorde had laughed at for centuries: faith, imagination, will, turned into power. One captured transmission from a Concorde ship described the human fleet as moving like thought itself. The pilot wrote that the enemy ships seemed alive, as if they responded not to machines but to emotion. He said he saw patterns of light forming wings and faces in the darkness, like angels from the old human myths. The Concorde tried to erase his report, but it was too late. The story spread across the galaxy, whispered by terrified soldiers and awestruck civilians alike. Desperation drove the Concorde to unleash its forbidden weapon, the Singularity Cannon, a device capable of tearing a hole through space. It had never been used, not even in war. They aimed it at the largest human vessel, a colossal ship at the center of the formation, shaped like a cross between a cathedral and a star. When they fired, the energy tore reality apart. The explosion blinded sensors and silenced communication for minutes. When the light faded, the ship was still there, untouched. Then, for the first time, the human fleet spoke again. A voice echoed across every communication system in the galaxy, calm and clear. "You use destruction to prove your strength," it said. "We use creation to remember who we are." And as the voice spoke, the damaged Concorde ships began to repair themselves, metal bending, energy flowing, holes healing as if time reversed. The humans were fixing their enemies, not killing them. The message was clear. They were not here for revenge. They were here to teach, to remind the galaxy that there was more to existence than cold science. The myths they once laughed at were now alive before their eyes. Humans walking between stars, commanding the elements of the universe with both knowledge and faith. The Concorde's leaders fell silent, realizing that the humans had found balance between two forces the galaxy had long separated. They had fused logic and belief, reason and wonder, turning dreams into reality. The very thing the Concorde had erased from their culture, imagination, was now their greatest weakness. As the battle ended, the human fleet didn't stay to rule or conquer. They simply drifted through the wreckage, their ships glowing softly. Each one left behind trails of light that spread across the stars, forming words in dozens of languages. The words said, "Remember who you were." Then, without a sound, the fleet disappeared into the dark once more, leaving the galaxy stunned. The Concorde survivors were silent. Their perfect world of logic had been broken by the very myths they once mocked, and deep down, every being in the galaxy began to feel something they hadn't felt in thousands of years: belief. The humans had shown them that faith was not weakness, that imagination was not madness, it was power, it was life, and from that day, no one in the galaxy ever laughed at myths again. The galaxy's scientists worked without rest, desperate to uncover the truth behind the mysterious human fleet. They gathered recordings, analyzed frequencies, and compared every pattern to the old data from Earth. What they discovered shocked them all. The voice that spoke through the transmissions was undeniably human. The tone, the rhythm, even the heartbeat signature matched the ancient records perfectly. Humanity had not vanished as everyone believed. They had changed, evolved, and perhaps become something beyond biological form. The fragments of intercepted data began to form a story, one that rewrote everything the galaxy thought it knew. Humanity had not died in the cataclysm that destroyed Earth. Instead, they had left, not fleeing, but ascending. They had discovered something deeper than physics, something that combined science and belief into one. It wasn't magic, but understanding so vast that it appeared magical. They had learned to weave their myths into reality, turning imagination into the blueprint of creation. The myths the Concord once mocked had become humanity's path to survival. Their old stories, of gods, heroes, and rebirth, were not childish fantasies. They were lessons, codes, and symbols guiding their transformation. They had used their greatest strength, their ability to believe, to imagine what did not yet exist, and then make it real. Every legend, every tale of hope and courage, had become a map for evolution. The scientists refused to accept it at first. It was too strange, too impossible. But the more data they studied, the clearer it became. The humans had built technology that responded to thought, powered by intention. Their ships were alive with human consciousness, their energy born from emotion, willpower turned into fuel, belief turned into propulsion. They were no longer just flesh and bone, they were ideas given form, walking myths made real. A captured fragment of their transmission said, "We became what we dreamed." That single sentence terrified and fascinated the galaxy. It meant that humans had merged with their own creations, blending life, technology, and spirit into one existence. They had crossed the line between story and reality. No one in the Concord could comprehend how they had done it. The idea that belief could create power went against everything they stood for. The Concord's leaders tried to control the information, but it was too late. The truth spread faster than light. People whispered about it in every city, on every planet. Children who grew up mocking myths now looked at the stars with wonder again. The people began to ask questions their rulers could not answer. If humans could return from extinction, what else could be possible? Could belief truly shape the universe? Could the things they called impossible only be waiting for someone to imagine them first? In secret, a few brave researchers formed a group dedicated to studying the human data. They called themselves the Dreamers. They believed that the humans had found the missing half of knowledge, the soul of science. They started experimenting with old stories and mathematical models, mixing mythological symbols with equations. To everyone's surprise, their results began to show strange energy reactions. Small but undeniable, it was as if the universe itself responded when imagination and logic worked together. Meanwhile, the human fleet continued to move through the galaxy. They didn't conquer or destroy. They simply appeared near important systems, staying just long enough for their presence to be felt. On each planet they passed, they left behind faint symbols in the sky, glowing constellations that resembled ancient human myths. Each one told a different message: hope, unity, remember. The symbols stayed for days, visible even through daylight, then slowly faded into the stars. No one knew whether the humans were warning the galaxy or guiding it. Some believed they had come to punish the arrogant, others said they were teaching the truth of creation. Whatever the reason, the galaxy could not go back to what it was before. Every being who looked into the night sky now saw more than stars. They saw meaning. The cold, logical universe no longer felt empty, it felt alive. The Concord finally admitted what it had denied for centuries: humanity had not been wrong to dream. The myths they once mocked had become real because humans never stopped believing in them. Even in extinction, they had carried their faith into the void, and that faith had built their future. The scientists called it transcendent synthesis, but poets across the stars gave it a simpler name: the return of wonder. From that day, schools began teaching the old human stories again, not as jokes, but as lessons. The idea that imagination was as powerful as reason changed everything. The galaxy started to feel something it had lost long ago: inspiration. And somewhere, deep in the void, the human fleet continued its silent journey, watching, guiding, reminding the galaxy that myths were not lies. They were memories of what every civilization could become if it dared to dream without fear. The galaxy was quiet after the last battle. The stars seemed softer, as if they too were trying to understand what had happened. The once proud fleets of the Concord floated in silence, their weapons offline, their lights dim. For the first time in countless years, the galaxy was not ruled by fear or logic, but by awe. Every civilization, from the smallest moon colonies to the grandest core worlds, watched the skies and waited. They didn't know if the humans would return again, but their message was already echoing in every heart. The people who once mocked Earth's myths now told those same stories to their children. They spoke of courage, hope, and faith, not as weaknesses, but as powers. The Concord tried to rebuild, but it could not return to what it was. The foundation of its pride had cracked. The scientists who once claimed to know everything now spoke with humility, admitting that there were things beyond their understanding. They began to study not only the laws of physics, but also the mysteries of belief and imagination. For the first time, logic and wonder stood side by side. Across the galaxy, change began quietly. Artists, dreamers, and philosophers returned to the places they had once been banned from. Cities that used to shine only with cold metal light now glowed with color. Murals appeared on the sides of starports, paintings of human faces surrounded by stars, of mythic heroes standing between galaxies, of Earth itself reborn from fire. The people had learned something precious. They realized that progress without meaning was empty, and that perfection without heart was lifeless. In the great archives of Lurith Prime, the once ridiculed human exhibit was transformed. The laughter and mockery were gone. Instead, visitors came in silence, listening to the old songs and voices of humanity. A small plaque was added under the title. It said, "They dreamed, and so they became." The halls echoed not with jokes, but with respect. Many visitors left in tears, feeling something they could not explain, a spark, a whisper that maybe they too could become more than what they were. Rumors spread that the human fleet still watched from the edges of known space. Sometimes, explorers reported strange sightings, a flicker of light in the void, a shadow moving faster than thought. When they tried to follow, they found nothing. Yet, in their recordings, faint whispers could be heard, words in dozens of languages saying the same thing. Remember who you are. The scientists dismissed them as interference. But no one truly believed that anymore. Some said the humans had built a new home, a world hidden beyond the borders of space, where time moved differently. Others believed they had no home at all, that they now lived within the stars themselves, guiding life like ancient guardians. Whatever the truth, their presence remained, unseen but felt. The myths of humanity had returned to life, not as stories, but as reminders that even the smallest species could rise to greatness if it refused to stop dreaming. Generations passed, and the galaxy grew wiser. The Concord became something new, a council not of pride, but of understanding. They welcomed storytellers alongside scientists, poets alongside engineers. Every new world added its own legends to the galactic archives, inspired by humanity's return. They called this new era the Age of Belief, not because everyone worshipped, but because everyone remembered the power of wonder. And though the humans themselves were rarely seen again, their lessons shaped every civilization that came after them. Ships were built not just with logic, but with beauty. Weapons were designed not to destroy, but to protect. Children were taught to question, to imagine, to believe. The old phrase, "Don't think like a human," disappeared from the galaxy's vocabulary, replaced by a new one, "Dream like a human." On one quiet night, many centuries later, a signal appeared again. It was soft, faint, almost lost among the background noise of space. Every receiver in the galaxy picked it up at once, a single voice speaking in the ancient tongue of Earth. The message was simple: we are not gods, we are not myths, we are humanity, and we endure. Then the signal faded, leaving behind a silence filled with hope. The galaxy never forgot that moment. From then on, every civilization, no matter how advanced, kept a small space in their hearts for the unseen, the unproven, and the impossible. They understood that myths were not lies. They were the universe speaking through dreams, and somewhere, far beyond the last star, in the endless dark where no maps reached, the human fleet continued to drift, watching over the galaxy they had once inspired, reminding all life that imagination was the oldest and strongest form of power, and that even in the cold silence of space, humanity's light would never fade.